All yours.
So my friend Sandy and her sister grew up near Clarksville, Indiana, and they've been telling me about the fossils at Falls of the Ohio for years. So at Sandy's recommendation and Terry's recommendation, I reached out to Dr. Alan Goldstein. As a park paleontologist and interpretive naturalist, Dr. Goldstein has worked at the Falls of the Ohio State Parks Interpretive Center since it opened in January 1994. Additionally, Dr. Goldstein has been the curator of the Gerald Troost collection at the Louisville Science Center. He has been investigating, collecting, and writing about the Illinois-Kentucky fluorspar district since 1982. His articles on the fluorspar district, published in 1997, won the Friends of Mineralogy paper of the year. He has also written for Mineral News and contributed to the American Mineral Treasures volume. He has published over 130 articles in periodicals, including 2 that won national peer awards. In addition to his professional writing, he has also published the novel, A Dragon in My Backyard. So without further rambling on my part, I am pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Alan Goldstein, presenting about the Falls of the Ohio State Park.
All right, well, I appreciate the introduction. First thing I'm going to say is that I feel like a doctor sometime, but I never got a PhD. So for you guys, it's honorary, but believe it or not, I have done so much that people think I have a PhD just by the volume of work that I've been doing. I've also been involved with crinoid research. So here I am, somebody working at the Falls of the Ohio as a park paleontologist, but mostly as a naturalist and educator. And I have never published a paper professionally on any fossil at the Falls of the Ohio, even though I've seen and found species that were never described. But that's because there's no coral experts out there that are surviving. Everybody that I knew that was a Devonian coral expert pretty much passed away. And again, that I knew. There may be other people out there today. Let me just start by going to the first slide, and we'll go from there. Let's see here. Okay. There it goes. So the scope of what I want to talk about tonight includes everything from, why was the Falls of Ohio established? It's kind of an interesting story. When was the falls protected? Because people have been collecting at the falls for a long time. I think there's enough longs. What actually makes up the park? The park is actually Indiana's smallest state park. So there's a lot of the falls is actually not part of the park itself. I'm going to talk about the fossil beds, which is why the park exists. I'll talk a little bit about the programs we offer, specifically the geology programs. And I'll talk about our collections. I've got a couple cool pictures to show you, a couple stories to tell as well. So I'm going to start with why the park was established. So here's a picture of one of our summer hikes a few years ago, and we cleaned the fossil beds. And so normally there's a thin layer of mud over everything, and I'll show more about that here in a bit. But the fossil beds were exceptionally clean one year, so we just poured water over them, and you can see the contrast between the dark limestone and the white fossils. The geological significance of the Falls of Ohio is the fact that first of all, it's one of the first known fossil localities in North America. And the reason I can say that with some certainty is because the fossil beds were literally in the middle of the Ohio River, and any of the first, like the French first trappers that came down in the 1600s, they had to stop at the head of the falls to figure out how to get around them. And actually, the Native Americans at the time actually showed them the best routes to go. The Native Americans also revered the falls and the fossils because archaeological digs throughout the Ohio Valley area have found Devonian fossils associated with certain time frame burials. And so there was back about 6,000 years ago, there was a specific time period where a lot of a lot of fossils were found associated with burials. The fossils are, for the most part, Middle Devonian. There's a smidgen of Lower Devonian, which I'll talk about in a bit. The fossil beds are pretty unique in that on a good chunk of the fossil beds, there's places where you can walk on one budding plane that essentially represents the seafloor covering several acres, and that's over different places. So you can get a three-dimensional aspect of what the fossils, how they were laid out and preserved, and with the bigger ones in particular, how far apart they were and how big they grew and so forth, because the larger specimens are actually all in situ. The hurricanes and tropical storms of the day, which cause all this stirring of the other fossils in this picture here, weren't strong enough to do a lot of damage to the biggest fossils. And so I call that dry snorkeling, and that, you're kind of looking at the seafloor, but without having to having to get wet. As a naturalist, I have to put up with a lot of comments. People want to market the fossil beds, and they say, well, is it the oldest? No. Is it the largest? No. They're trying to grab onto something that they can use for a sales pitch to get tourists to come. And, of course, the, superlatives like the largest, oldest, biggest, whatever, that's more marketable. So what I tell people, it's one of the most accessible. Here we have a fossil bed that covers about 220 acres today, that is literally surrounded by 1 million people. So it's very accessible. Unfortunately, it's also the middle of the river, which means that when the river's high, parts of the fossil beds are underwater. I already mentioned that, dry snorkeling. I did not trademark that, but I might as well, right? So why was the park established? Well, you'd think that somebody, something as special as a fossil bed, people would be interested in preserving it. But in fact, for most people, it was actually an obstacle, because they were trying to go down the river from, Cincinnati and points further upriver down to the Mississippi River, down to New Orleans, over to St. Louis, and the fossil beds were in the way. So for years, they were blasting and other aspects of fossil removal and rock removal. In fact, one island is literally completely blasted away to make way for river traffic going into the Portland Canal, which again, I'll talk about here in a bit. So an effort was made early on to to preserve the park because of the geological history and the history, which again, I'll talk more about. But for the most part, it fell on deaf ears. The park was also famous because of a fellow named George Rogers Clark, who was involved in keeping the Northwest Territories, which includes Illinois, from the hands of the British. General Hamilton, based in Detroit, made a darn good effort to try to open up everything north of the Ohio River to the British. And people will say that if it wasn't for George Rogers Clark, you guys would be located in Canada right now. John James Audubon, a famous artist, spent 3 years in the Louisville area making sketches and some paintings, but mostly sketches. He actually went bankrupt because his business in Portland, which is right across the river from the falls in Louisville, he spent so much time going over the falls and doing sketches and watching birds that he actually, his business failed because he wasn't giving it enough time, effort and time. And he basically left town in a real hurry. He was there, he lived in Louisville from 1808 to 1810. And then, as they say, he got out of Dodge before the debtors could come and throw him in prison. So he ended up going to Henderson, where he stayed for about 10 years. So here's an example of a merganser, one of the birds. And I'm not saying for sure this was taken at the falls, but it sure looks like the falls backdrop. Back in 1999, an effort began, and it's one of these situations where as the park naturalist, I have to do a little bit of everything. And although my motto is, if it's younger than 10,000 years, I'm not interested in it. Because that's, not, it's a subfossil, right? But in 1999, we knew that the Lewis and Clark bicentennial was coming. And we knew that Lewis and Clark met at the Falls of Ohio in 1803 in October. So I started beating the drum. Come on, guys, we need to do something. And so we established a committee to get the bicentennial celebration going. And thankfully, it snowballed to the point where I could bail out and go back to paleontology again. And so we had a signature event, a national signature event in October of 2003 that, thank goodness, I had absolutely no role in. I was just the catalyst and let other people do all the work. And I just said, all right, let's talk fossils. In 1930, the first lock and dam was built. Here's a construction shot from the late 20s. All of the fossils being blasted, right? All the humanity of it all. It was called Lock and Dam 41. And today, the more recent one is the McAlpin Dam, which was actually just built right on top of the Lock and Dam 41. It's a high lift dam with Tanner gates. The old dam had wickets, leak like a sieve, but it kept the fossil beds clean. I've got pictures of the fossil beds in the 50s that look phenomenal. I mean, it's like all the corals, you could reach out and pull them out. They look so clean. And when they built this new dam in the 60s, everything got silted over. And so this is what the falls looks like today. You don't see the bridge and stuff in this picture. This is looking towards the, basically looking west. And interpretive center, in the lower center, the section of the fossil beds, I don't know if you see my cursor moving or not, but this section over here is where we do most of our programming. And it's about 4 or 5 acres. Maybe more than that, actually, because it curves around out of the site. But the total acreage when the river is really low is about 220 acres. And the thing you got to remember is that before they built the dam in the 20s, the fossil beds went all the way over to the far side and went all the way up to near the 4th Street Wharf. So the original fossil beds, the river dropped 26 feet over 2.5 miles. And that 2.5 miles was completely covered with fossils. So we're talking about probably close to 2,000 acres of fossil beds. And so really today, only 10% of the fossil beds are preserved. Now, this fossil bed area is obviously, the fossil beds just don't stop, at the edge of the river. They keep going, mostly to the northeast and to the east directly. They don't go very far south. And of course, if you go west, you get into younger rock. And so the fossil beds are buried under shale and deeper. And there's places in Louisville that I've been collecting fossils for decades that are very nice specimens, silicified, 3-dimensional, in a creek right next to my mother-in-law's condominium, and perfectly legal because it's not in any protected area. Unfortunately, the outcrop is so small that I'm very hesitant taking people over there because it's only like 15 feet wide and 300 feet long. And, it's just not a very big place to collect fossils. So when was the falls protected? Again, as I mentioned, the place was beat up, abused, and used, for decades, and well, actually for centuries, if you will. So the protection actually started very recently, geologically speaking. The first effort to protect it was done in the mid 60s by some local doctors. And they used their clout with local politicians to reach out to federal people, including the Secretary of the Interior, who actually came and visited. And they beat the Falls, Ohio drum to say this is a great place. This should be a national park because the fossil beds are so unique. The National Park Service says, nah, it's too small. Okay, so they never mind. And this is a place that, has Independence Hall, which is a lot smaller than most national parks are. So they designated it as a national natural landmark. Now, I'm sure around Illinois and northern Illinois, you're going to find places that are NNLs. There's caves around in southern Indiana that promote themselves as a national natural landmark. That designation did absolutely nothing to protect the fossil beds. It's essentially a marketing tool. And I mean, they didn't even have a place to hang a plaque over there, because if they did, someone would have stolen it because of the bronze or the brass or whatever. So we actually got our NNL plaque back in a couple of years after the park opened. I just called the National Park Service, says, "Oh yeah, we got a plaque for you in storage." So they sent it to us, and it's mounted on the building, and the paint's already started peeling off of it, and we repainted it a couple of times. So again, it's too small. In 1981, the falls was established as a U.S. wildlife conservation area. So it's actually called the Falls of the Ohio National Conservation Area, and the Corps of Engineers actually manage it. And the reason the Corps of Engineers manage it is because of the locks and dam. I mean, they already have to manage the water flow and boat traffic and everything else. So the Corps of Engineers was assigned, this is a conservation area, and it's literally the only one in the United States that the Corps of Engineers actually manages. And in fact, the manager actually works at Taylorsville Lake, which is a reservoir about 30 miles from the Falls of Ohio. And so they come over, we got traffic counters, and we send them stats, and they give us information and so forth. But it's federally protected. So the fossil beds have been federally protected since 1981. But since there was nobody there to watch the fossil beds, people have been hauling off rocks, between 1981 and until after the park was established. And we actually built the building. That's actually the only thing that really slowed down people from taking fossils. And I can't tell you how many times I've stopped people from taking fossils standing right next to a sign that says rock and fossil collecting prohibited. And they swear with their hands on the Bible, so to speak, that they never saw the sign. Okay, well, I don't believe them, but who am I, right? So in 1987, an organization called the Clarksville Riverfront Foundation was established. The Falls, Ohio is in the town of Clarksville in Indiana, and it was established by some of the people on the town board. Clarksville is not a city; it's actually a town. They have not become a city intentionally because they can say that they're the oldest town in the Northwest Territories. Now, other places started as cities, but they were the first. They're the first town. So anyway, they developed this foundation, and they started fundraising, and were very successful at it. And in 1990, the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, State Parks said, "Okay, we'll manage it." And so the Falls became Indiana's first state park. Now, at this point, I was still working at the Science Center. So I was on a committee to help fundraise, but that was about the extent of my involvement because of my full-time job at the Science Center. And the story goes that Troy McCormick, the property manager who was hired in 1990, he and the director of state parks came down, met, and the two funny things that happened. One was the first time our director of state parks came down, they were sitting in a car, and a couple motorcycles came up and did a drug exchange literally 10 feet away from them. And then another time, they went out on the outer fossil beds. He went to show the director how wonderful the outer fossil beds were, and the Corps of Engineers decided to open the gates. And so they got stuck out there, and they had to flag down a fisherman who, for a nominal fee, took them back over to the Indiana side. So those are some stories. The Interpretive Center, which is the building you see right in front of you now, was the groundbreaking was in September of 92. The building was largely completed by the contractors in November of 1993. And I actually was hired the week that the contractors turned the building over to the state. So when I started working there in November of 93, the building was, the inside was empty, and except the only thing that was actually in there was the office, our offices and the desks and stuff like that. So I was actually the second full-time person hired at the Falls in November. My anniversary is actually November 8th, so I'm on my 29th year there now. And when I started, the joke was that we were outnumbered by spiders and centipedes than people because of the displacing nature, I suppose. And so they installed the exhibits in December, and we opened in January with partial exhibits and a temporary exhibit to fill in the other space. And the day before the exhibits were, the day before our dedication, it got down to like 5 below zero. The drain pipes froze and the building flooded. So it was an interesting opening. And then so it was, memories, right? So let's go to the next category about what makes up the park. So here is this shows you the outline of what we call the WCA. This is the National Wildlife Conservation Area, 1,404 acres. You can see that it's a high percentage of it is the Ohio River. Let's see here. Let me pull this down. So the Falls is actually, see if I can get my cursor up here again. It's actually for me behind you guys. I guess I can drag you around somewhere. I'll move you over here. So the park is in this area right here. I don't mean to drag everybody across the screen, but you got to do what you got to do. And the Clark Home site, which is a separate part of the park that's separated by private land, is this area right over here. Okay, so around the Interpretive Center, that's the area right there. So at that aerial photograph I showed you a few minutes ago, that part of that fossil beds I was talking about was right over here. The Clark Home site, as I mentioned, I gave you the wrong spot. It's right over here. I should know because there's the boat ramp right there. It's the most dangerous boat ramp on the Ohio River because it's right across from the gates of the dam. And they come out like this and curve over right in front of the boat ramp. And so our current property manager says, you know what? He went out there fishing with one of our naturalists and thought he was going to die. And he said, we're not going to be close. We're not opening that gate. We're not going to use the boat ramp for the public anymore. It's only for firefighters, emergency people. So the other part of the safer boat ramp actually washed out a year after they installed it. Nothing like wasting $700,000, I suppose. But, you just never know about these things. Now, the fossil beds, that's the closest, dearest to my heart. So this is our old diorama in the old exhibit gallery. It doesn't exist anymore. We have a new exhibit gallery. This has a whole room devoted to the Devonian instead of this little nook like this one was. And so I'm going to drag you back across the screen so I can see my text. So again, if you want to get precise, the fossil beds, the main part of the fossil beds are 393 million years old. I rounded to 390 because, if you're going to boggle somebody's mind, you might as well do it with a zero at the end of it. When I started working there, I had the geological GSA time chart, wallet card, which today my eyes cannot read because it's a 3-point font. But it had it listed as 387 million years old at the contact between the lower Devonian and the middle Devonian. And we have that lower Devonian, middle Devonian contact on the fossil beds. But it was like plus or minus 5 million years margin of error, which is a heck of a margin of error. And then in 2009, I attended a conference, a paleontology conference, the National Paleontology Conference in Cincinnati. And there was actually a session where they talked about a betabentonite where they'd actually now had improved their technology to gather zircon crystals and do the radiometric dating. And so at that place, which was the Tauga metabentonite, the age of the rocks is 390 million years, plus or minus a half million years. So instead of being plus or minus 5 million, it's now a half million years. And I'm estimating that the fossil beds are, because they're fairly far below, 35 feet below the Tioga metabentonite, is about 393 is a good number. But again, I keep the 390 just because it rolls off the tongue easier. The formation that the fossil beds are in is called the Jeffersonville limestone. Now, that's the name came from the fact that the fossil beds actually started in front of Jeffersonville. Today, because of the dam, the fossil beds are only found in Clarksville as far as the park is concerned. But it was named the Jefferson limestone about 110 years ago. The fossil beds, or let's just say the Devonian in the Louisville area, or if I'm going to be politically correct, the Falls area, has about 600 species of fossils. That's invertebrates. There's a few vertebrates and fish. Lots of, and about 150 species are coral. And I corresponded with Bill Oliver, who was the Rugose coral expert of North America, deceased now. And he and I worked together just by kind of just communicating back and forth to narrow down species. And Stum's book in 1964, 65, which is the Bible for the Falls, the Ohio area, has a lot of mistakes in it, which he corrected for me. But in a nutshell, the Falls area has the greatest diversity of rugose and tabulate corals in the Western Hemisphere, with 150 species between the Jeffersonville limestone, the Sellersburg limestone, the Beechwood limestone. Those formations are just absolutely packed with corals. The Jeffersonville limestone having the most. And I mentioned dry snorkeling earlier. The fact that there's large flat exposures on both sides of the channel, where you can see some amazing fossils. And again, I'll show you some pictures here because I'm going to break down the fossil beds in more detail here in a moment. So I have always used two terms to describe the fossil beds, and this is this picture here actually shows both of them. The lower fossil beds is a larger flat area. The upper fossil beds are where the trees are growing. And the lower fossil beds are underwater for a good chunk of the year. The upper fossil beds are actually exposed most of the year. Going to hit the wrong button there. There's the lower beds. So on the lower beds, there's large planar areas where you can walk and see corals that were essentially growing about the same time. The upper fossil beds was a slightly deeper water environment, so it's more there's more fragmented fossils up there than there are on the lower fossil beds, at least varieties. The upper fossil beds has more different types of fossils. The lower fossil beds has less diversity, but bigger fossils and better preservation for the most part. So if we look at the upper fossil beds, this is a random picture near the wheelchair ramp that we have. Lots of boulders, lots of slabs, lots of outcrops. The river covers this. You can see the driftwood in this picture. There's a log right there. Right today, the driftwood is actually closer to the steps and our ramp, and the fossil beds themselves are relatively clear. Although we had a microburst and a thunderstorm that produced 4 small tornadoes Sunday morning, and a microburst took out about 50 trees in a small area of our woods, including some on the fossil beds. So more rocks to be exposed, I suppose. So again, the upper fossil beds, the river can literally come up, completely cover the fossil beds. There's no rocks at all exposed. That happens every year without exception. Typically, it doesn't last very long. Usually a few weeks at a time. Comes back, lowers down, and comes back up again. The upper fossil beds, because they're exposed like this most of the year, including in the wintertime, suffer the effects of freezing and thawing. And, you know, things come and go basically. And we try to salvage stuff for putting in our park collections. But I mean, the crinoids and blastoids and other fossils that I've got pictures of that have disappeared can make you cry. But new things pop up all the time. In fact, last week we had a group of kids from different schools, and one day one kid found a blastoid the size of a small olive, actually size of a pinky fingernail, basically, you know, real tiny. A day or two later, a kid found a silicified high spired snail that's just unbelievably well preserved. It's going in our park collections. The blastoid is still attached to the bedrock. It's not going anywhere for a while. And then another kid found a big snail, again, right at the edge of a rock where it wasn't exposed last year. So things come and go. And if we can salvage it, we will, but we do not go down there with a hammer. If it's in a loose rock, we'll take it. If it's not in a loose rock, it stays there. And so that's why we sometimes lose things, but we do take pictures. Jeffersonville limestone up higher, up at the below our interpretive center, the layer is called the bryozoan brachipod zone. And the Jeffersonville limestone is actually broken up by faunal zones. So you can figure out what are the common fossils in the bryozoan brachipod zone. However, it also has blastoids. It has complete, you know, we have crinoid heads up there. It has snails and clams. Well, that's not snails, not so much, but clams and rostraconchs. Sometimes we find fish bones, small fish bones. So the bryozoan brachipod zone is a pretty interesting layer. Below that is this brevispirifer zone, named after a brachipod called Brevispirifer gregarious. And when we say gregarious, we're talking about layers that have over the falls area would have several billion brachiopods. Most of them are single shells. One of the kids found a complete brachiopod last couple days ago, sitting on my desk right now. The whole Brevispirifers are, you know, one in 10,000 basically. The silicified zone is actually due to a volcanic ash deposit, so it gives us a chance to talk about radiometric dating. During the Middle Devonian, New England was volcanically active. I mentioned that Cadillac Mountain at Acadia National Park is Middle Devonian in age. Now, obviously, granted, it's a magma chamber. It's not stuff that comes out, but you know, it's connected to surface venting and ash layers and so forth. So I don't tell people that this particular layer comes from, you know, Cadillac Mountain or anything. I just say that, you know, that's where the volcanoes were erupting. We were south of the equator, about 30 degrees south of the equator. And so the prevailing winds would have been coming out of the east since we're south of the equator. And so it was perfect opportunity for this ash deposits to blow over the sea, and left a whole bunch of different metabentonites, you know, ash layers. And so you get these zones where the silica from the ash layer, the quartz, permeates the rock and creates these really interesting orangish looking layers, or black, depending on how much it's underwater. Below that is the Amphipora zone, named after Amphipora ramosa, a spaghetti-like stromatoporoid. And in fact, we just found some extraordinary colonies last fall when we went down on the fossil beds with a pressure washer. I've been there 29 years, had never had the opportunity to run a pressure washer on the fossil beds. And oh my goodness, the things we found. Switching to the lower fossil beds. Again, the best time, if you want to come to the falls to see the fossil beds, I recommend September and October. Although you can come for digging the past, which is late August. And the reason I say it is because these fossil beds, like this picture you see right here, typically August, September, October, early November is when it looks like this. That's our dry season for the Eastern United States. And I mean, I've seen it low like this in May before, and I've seen high water in August before. So it really all depends on the local climate or the regional climate, hurricanes, things like that can bring water in. But typical August, September, October, ideal months to come. But in August, it's really hot on the fossil beds. I mean, like, you know, put a thermometer on the rocks, it's 125 degrees. So, and there's no shade. I don't see any shade in that picture, do you? So you wear a hat or take an umbrella or something like that. And so we'll do programs out there unless it's in the 90s. And then we won't, because it's not safe to be down there without shelter. So lower fossil beds, essentially there's two parts. The coral zone has the upper and lower coral zone. And it's dominated by naturally corals. Rugose and tabulate corals, which basically go from the lower Ordovician up to the end of the Permian, then they become extinct. Again, as you saw in my previous slide, there's a great amount of diversity. And we also have something called a stromatoporoid. Sounds like an Italian sandwich, but it's actually just a finely layered sponge. But when it was living, it actually precipitated out calcium carbonate instead of the organic material that modern sponges use. And some of the stromatoporoids in corals get fairly large. There's two parts. The upper coral zone is shallow. This is right here in this picture. Everything looks like it's been just churned in a blender, except for, but it does have some large fossils, but most of the things are all jumbled around. The lower coral zone is actually the uppermost Emsian, so it's actually the top of the early Devonian. It has deeper water indications because you find three-dimensional branching corals and tube corals and other types of other corals that are really in three-dimensional, just spectacular condition, because the water was deep enough that the currents from the hurricanes did not shatter them. So let me show you some pictures here. So here's a picture of the upper coral zone. The rock is clean, all right, because normally it's brown. In other words, there's a thin layer of veneer of mud. The Ohio River runs brown most of the year because of the silt it carries. So we'll actually, often go out there just with buckets and water from puddles and just splash around and scrub it off and splash around and get the mud off. And then when it dries, it looks like this. But when you put water on it, it looks like that. So this is actually the same scene. So this coral here is this coral right here. This coral right here is that coral right there. So you can actually trace some of the same fossils. Now, what's interesting is you might notice that there's black material around the corals, and that black is actually dried tar. It flakes off. If you were underneath Evansville about 3,000 feet back in the 19th century, this was the stuff that you would drill for oil. But here, the oil is dried out, and so you end up with this black residue. But if you go to a rock quarry and find a piece of this coral zone and whack it with a hammer, you can just smell the oil on it. So here's some examples of some big fossils. This is a 4-foot-long solitary coral. So there's a broom for comparison. I can outstretch my arms, which don't fit in a Zoom screen. But I showed this coral to Bill Oliver when he was visiting a long time ago and said, "Is this the largest horn coral in the world?" And he said, "Well, I wouldn't say that, but I would say it's the largest one in the Western Hemisphere." So that's what I promote that as. It's about 3 inches in diameter and 4 feet long. And then over Fisherman's Point, we have a branching coral colony that's 8 feet wide. And if you look at it in cross section, you can see where the corals have been compressed a bit. These are just a couple of examples. The Cinophyllum, these colonies here, 1 to 3 feet across, but the record I've seen is 6 foot across. Here's a, up in Michigan, they call them Petoskey stones. Down here, we call them Prismatophyllum. I mean, it's not hexagonaria. It's actually a different species, a different genus. But these things the biggest one I've seen was 11 feet across. And then we also have some alloporid corals, which are essentially related to Fabacites, but they're separated out in Anastomopsis. And these things can get up to about a foot across. And then the last picture here, kind of funny looking, looks like these are like artistic patterns in the rocks. This is actually part of a branching Fabacetes coral that I've measured at 50 feet across. So long wise, it goes 50 feet. One side it disappears into the rocks, the next side it's eroded away. So we don't have the entire three-dimensional aspect of it. We just have the length and width for the most part. Here's a Fabacetes coral. You know, we call them honeycomb corals. It's 15 feet across. Looks like a little volcano, actually. And then here's another part of that 50-foot coral where you can see the outside of the colonies are partially silicified, you know, replaced by quartz. And so if we clean them off, they're actually very, very wide inside. And with a little luck, we're supposed to we have a firefighting unit at Charlestown State Park, which is our sister property. Our plan this summer is to bring the Polaris over. It's got with a firefighting package, we can actually pump water from the river into a tank and then attach the pressure washer. And with a little bit of luck, we'll be able to come out right at the edge of the river with a pressure washer and clean these fossil beds out here, which haven't been cleaned since the 50s. So it'll be pretty interesting to see what happens. The upper fossil beds, this is that silicified zone, the Brevis zone. My foot for scale, there's snails here. That's, I think, it's a clam. It's all replaced with quartz. When you get the sun shining on this location, it's just one of my naturalists call it the jewel box. This is in the bryozoan brachipod zone, just a very dense area of crinoid columns and stems and stuff. And then not far from where this snail is this large iridophyllum colony. It's about 3 feet across. I mentioned that we had been pressure washing the fossil beds. So we have enough hose to go about 500 feet. And we have the pressure washer unit is actually gas powered, so we have about 25 or 30 feet where we can run this hose from the machine. And unfortunately, being gasoline powered is pretty noisy. But on the other hand, it attracts a lot of attention. People are wanting to know what we're doing, so we have a chance to talk to them about the fossil beds. So it's our goal to get back down there and continue the process of cleaning up we found fossils that have literally never been seen before because of the way the rate of the erosion rate of the rocks. I mean, I've been there 29 years and there were places that were cleaned 29 years ago that have disappeared and I cleaned them back out again. And it's just, oh man, it was so much fun. Here, for example, is a place we cleaned that I've literally walked on maybe thousands of times. And here's a trilobite tail right there. And another trilobite tail right there. And I mean, we were literally walking on it over and over again. The rock was actually black from air pollution. And so we peeled that black layer off with a pressure washer. And, we just found all sorts of cool stuff. Program wise, our meat and potatoes is public and school programming. We don't have a campsite on our place. We're a day park. We're open 9 to 5. Monday through Saturday, 1 to 5 on Sundays, except in the summertime. We're actually getting ready to close our building next week for 4 months because they're completely replacing the HVAC. So if you want to come and go through exhibit galleries this year, save your field trip till sometime in October or early November, because we'll be doing programs weekend programs, but no indoor restrooms or anything like that. So it's going to be pretty primitive. We've had over 150,000 students visit in the last 29 years. And we offer weekend hikes, and actually we're going to be doing some weekday hikes this year as well, but basically Memorial Day weekend through late October. And then we have special events like Digging the Past. I do a program like the Family Nature Club. We do a junior ranger program with Lewis and Clark through the National Park Service. My assistant is an artist, so we do a monthly art at the falls. And then I do Meet the Paleontologist. There I am in the picture there with, and I've been doing that since 2015, and trying to come up with a different topic every month for 8 years has been challenging. And I'm not gonna say I haven't duplicated, because I know I have, but it's I try to be as creative as possible. So I mean, I'll do, shells one time, and scavengers one time, and carnivores one time, and fish one time, and plants one time. And I mean, I try to do as many different things as I can. I mentioned digging in the past. It's our big geology, archaeology event. It's Saturday before Labor Day weekend. So again, you're welcome to come down for a field trip for that. We have 3 collecting piles, which we keep up year round. And so people dig at them virtually every day that they're not covered over with snow or frozen into a brick. But we have Waldron shale, Devonian residual fossils from Salisbury Quarry, and a mineral pile. I used to get minerals from Hasties at Cave and Rock, but that disappeared about a number of years ago. And so now I'm working on Steve Garza's mineral collection, and he's got about 1 million specimens, and there's a lot of junk in there. And so I just salvage some of the junk. And the day before the event, we go in there and add stuff, or we'll get a dump truck of Waldron from the Salisbury Quarry, drop a load. Sometimes we'll drop 2 32-ton dump truck loads. And people find cystoids and crinoids and everything else that Waldron's famous for around here. We also do hourly and outer fossil bed hikes for digging the past. So we go out on the far side of the channel. We like to boast. I boast that we're the only state park in Indiana that offers out-of-state tours, because literally, if you go out to the edge of the river, you're actually in Kentucky. And then we also can do some archaeological activities and partner with one of the local archaeological societies. And then the Indiana Geological Survey comes, and IMI used to come, but they haven't been in the last 5 or 6 years. Then to do a paleontology camp. This is a career camp for kids. I've been doing it for over 25 years, every July. 10 families, although some years, like this year and last year, I think we got 11 families. Had a family, we've got them from probably more than half the country. This year, for example, we have our new state is Arkansas. We never had anybody from Arkansas, but we have them Ohio and Illinois. We got a bunch from. This year we have nobody from Indiana, for example. Last year we had a kid from the Comoros Islands, which is over near Madagascar. So that was our farthest visitor. We talked about what to take in high school, how to select a university if you want to be a paleontologist. We take them field collecting. We spend a lot of time back identifying fossils, and they can take whatever they find in the field, since it's not at the falls, back home with them. So this year right now we're at 7 states, but I've heard we've got one more person who was on reserve who they forgot about, and so we may have 11 people this year, so maybe another state. I mentioned the Comoros Islands. The father of the kid had some pictures of a coelacanth that had just been caught like about a month before. So I've got some fresh, last year fresh coelacanth pictures. Finally, or nearly finally, collections. We're one of the only state parks in Indiana that started with collections in mind, because the fossil beds are protected. We're not supposed to be taking fossils out of the National Wildlife Conservation Area. So we just take them to our collections for them. And we've gotten donations over the year. This is part of the Unger collection. But right now on my desk, I've got a Brevispirifer, a snail, a complete rostra conch, and a phenomenal trilobite that I'll show you a picture of here in just a second. It was found last week. Just unbelievable. So we have about 2,000 fossils. I'm retiring in about 2 years, and my goal is to have a website up with the entire collections, fossils, archaeology, everything we got, accessible as a searchable database, and it's going to be photograph based. So I've looked at a bunch of museum websites with databases for collections, and they're pathetic as far as trying to identify stuff. And so again, we preserve anything that's worth salvaging, which is about 1% of what we find. We also have a small river mussel collection, which is actually Ohio and Mississippi Valley. And we have we have 3 large projectile point collections and bonefish hooks and so forth. I think we have the largest bonefish hook collection in Indiana. And we also have a lot of photographs and even more now because somebody just donated now 50 pounds of photographs, let's just say, of the falls from the 50s, or well, let's say the last 100 years. And it's sort of miscellaneous artifacts. So, for example, this is a trilobite, which is on display, an odontocephalus that was found in 1997 by a 4th grader. Tom Johnson prepared it. He's a fellow in Ohio that did trilobite, I haven't talked to him in ages, trilobite preparation. Here's a Dolatocrinus that was found probably by me below the fossil beds. Here's a Eleocrinus, one of the blastoids, devonian blastoids. Like I said, a kid just found one last week that's still a small one, not smaller than that one, on our fossil beds. Replaces the small one that disappeared about 2 years ago. Here's a snail covered with quartz that was actually in our original exhibits. Here's a colonial coral, which I actually put in acid to dissolve some of the limestone. It was a boulder of limestone, but I could tell the coral was silicified. Here's what we call a wasp nest coral. Plerodictium is a scientific name, and these things get up to about 3 feet across, but silicified. This is a pretty good size specimen. And this was found about a week ago. It's a Odontocephalus. So the rock, as you can see, there's a metric scale at the top. So it's a small piece of rock, and we're missing just a small piece of the pygidium. But I mean, this is a wonderful specimen. It's found by a 4th grader. They were running rampant down on the fossil beds, and they brought that over to one of my seasonal naturalists. Says, "What is this?" And I think Nick's eyes just got popped out of his head. He doesn't know a lot about fossils, but he knows about trilobites. So that's, again, we're when people find stuff like that on the fossil beds, we want them to give it to us for preservation. So that's it. That's kind of the Falls of the Ohio story. And we encourage people to come and visit. Again, I'm sorry that our visitor center will be closed for 4 months, but when we reopen, we'll have new lighting, better air conditioning and heating that hopefully will work, and LED lights, and they're actually replacing the sprinkler system because the current one, the company that made it doesn't exist anymore, and all the replacement parts there's no replacement parts, so they've got to completely replace the sprinkler system. So they basically buffered it closure time to account for stuff like that. So, it's a great place to see sunsets. So open up to questions, and thank you for listening.
I have a
Thank you very
question.
much, Andy.
I have a question. You think the river will recover in a few years? Right back it used to before European came.
I'm not sure I understood your question.
Do you think the river will come back to what it once was before European came?
No, because the dam is in the way.
But if without the people, it will recover, right?
Well, as long as the dam is there, the fossil beds are going to be only partially exposed. So basically, hundreds of thousands of rocks have been moved out of the fossil beds since they were known, both for construction purposes, both to make room for steamboats and so forth. Again, remember, the fossil beds were not protected legally until 1981, and Louisville was established in 1778. And of course, people have been living in the area even before then. So the fossil beds will never be what they used to be, but the best we can do right now is to keep people from stealing more fossils, going out there with pressure washer and cleaning them, knowing that the river is going to carry silt and cover them over again.
I have a question. Since the fossils obviously, it changes and some of them end up going downstream. Is there a spot downstream where there's some good collection areas?
Believe it or not, at the other end of the fossil beds is the New Albany Shale, which of course doesn't have any, I mean, it's, not large, essentially non-fossiliferous. And because the river is channelized, the river's high enough that any rocks that wash down the river are likely to end up in the middle of the channel, so they'll stay underwater. And if you go down the river far enough, where they might get washed out, if it's limestone, it doesn't take long for pieces of rock like that to be tumbled and smooth and so forth. So, you think it maybe find something like a Petoskey stone type preservation downriver, but I have never heard of a single person ever finding a fossil down the river on the, on the walk in the riverbank or anything like that.
So you don't have people doing diving into that area?
No. I mean,
Got to remember the river's very silted.
yeah, there's a lot of silt in it, and I mean, the fact is that this lower section, the lower section, it's kind of being worn down. I mean, yes, there's some breakage and some vandalism that caused the rocks to break. But in the channel, for example, let me see if I can get my mouse to work here. So like right here, where my cursor is moving, there's actually a canyon that is like 30 feet deep, right in this area here. I've actually got a topographic map of the floor of the river, which we've used when people have drowned here before, so that divers can look and get an idea of what the depths are and so forth. There's a lot of karst topography on the bottom of the river. I mean, I've heard one time they were looking for somebody. One of the guys was diving and they found a 60-foot hole in the rock that was like 4 feet diameter. So it'd be like a pit in a cave, 4 feet wide, 60 feet deep.
Wow.
And with little wearing out areas on the sides. And he said that's, he said he's not trained to be a cave diver. So I mean he couldn't do much. So there's plenty of nooks and crannies that are way deep in there that rocks could fall into and would never fall out of.
That's interesting.
What was that one trilobite that was found by a fourth grader again? That was
It's called
incredible.
a Odontocephalus. Yeah.
I've never seen that before.
Believe it or not, that's the fourth one that I've seen in the 29 years I've been here. And we actually had one that was not very, I mean, most of them are fairly weathered. In fact, Mike, my assistant, actually found a mold of almost a whole Odontocephalus, which I'm not even including because it's an impression. But the funny thing is that, if you look at just the tails and stuff, the small trilobite fragments you see, the most common one is actually a Crassiproteus, which has the rounded tail. And then next to Phacops, which has the kind of the short C-shaped tail, but we never find them whole. I mean, I've never seen a whole one of those here ever in 29 years, but yet we've got 5 or 6 complete Odontocephalus, but they're hard to find fragments of those. I mean, we do find some, but but for some reason that they're the ones that are whole, but they're just once every 7 or 8 years is not a common fossil, obviously.
These layers weren't formed during any of the extinction events, were they?
No, because the closest major extinction event would have been the was it the Frasian Flaminian, which is the Upper Devonian extinction. So it's before the Mississippian. That would be in the Black Shales. So but locally
Yeah,
here,
too old.
when you go from the limestones, the Devonian limestones to the New Albany Shale, we're talking about a massive change in environment. one where the oceans were at one point open, like the Florida Bay or the Bahamas, for example, and then all of a sudden it's a closed, stratified, with anoxic water at the bottom and oxygenated water at the top. So when things died and floated to the bottom, they'd be preserved, but corals and things that normally encrust the ocean floor couldn't survive because there wasn't enough oxygen.
Got a question on the blastoid that you found or had a picture of. What was the name of that again?
It's Eleocrinus.
Yep.
Oh, Eleocrinus vernulii. They're pretty common or widespread because I've seen some in Missouri before in the Callaway limestone.
How do you spell that?
Very carefully. I think it's E-L-E-A-E. Crinus.
E-L-E-A.
E. Crinus. Eleocrinus. It's either I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Eleocrinus. Is there the first? It was first described by Troost as olivinites because it looks like an olive with 5 zippers on it, and the ambulacral grooves. I have seen one Is it not? What's Decachisma? It's one of the pentamerid type blastoids that has a Decachisma or heteroschisma. I've seen there's one on a boulder near where that snail was, but it is weathered really terribly. So it's just like you could barely tell it's a blastoid, but it's one of those.
John, does that look like the ones that I have? It looked very similar, didn't it? It isn't.
You mean not the ones from the 4 county quarry?
Okay, it isn't, you don't think? Okay.
No, those things are more globular. The Eleocrinus is tall and narrow.
Okay.
I can show you some if you want. I've got a couple.
Okay. Yeah, I've got some that are about the size of an egg, and they're good sized and they're robust. So that's what I'm just curious.
Yeah, the largest Eleocrinus that I've seen are probably maybe 1.5 inches long. Yeah, I've never seen them any bigger than that. And in fact, the one that the kid found a couple of days ago is about, maybe I'm going to switch to metric. It's maybe 7 centimeters or 7 millimeters across or 6 millimeters across.
No,
So it's a little fellow.
that's small. Yeah.
Which is why we never saw it before because it was so small. But it's positioned with one of the ambulacral grooves right at the top, so it looks like it's a little ball with a zipper on it. So it's very easy. And there's actually another one that I found when we were pressure washing, about 15 feet away from this one, and it's silicified, which is kind of weird. So you got and it's sticking up. Most of the time they're laying down, and this is sticking up not quite straight up, and it's silicified. It's bright white, and and it was like, holy cow, how did we miss that sucker? Because it was so white. I mean, it's possible they had some pollutants on it covering it, making it darker. But boy, when we cleaned it off, that sucker is straight. I mean, it's easy to see if you know what to look for. I don't show people most blastoids. I'll show kids because they'll never come back and they can't find them anyway. But I typically on hikes with adults and stuff, I usually don't show them the rarest specimens because I don't want anybody to come back and whack it or try to steal or something like that.
It's a good idea, Alan.
But I'll show it to you guys because I trust you.
I've got another question. I was involved with when we had the Devonian Fossil Gorge here in Iowa City.
Yeah.
I was on the board that put that together and stuff. There were 6 of us on that, but it happened, I believe, in '93 and then again in 2008.
Yeah, the big floods.
Yeah, big floods that overtopped the spillway. But anyhow, after the '93 one and before the 2008, nature seemed to start reclaiming a lot of weeds and debris and stuff like that.
Right.
And after the 2008, it cleaned it again, and now it's doing the same thing to the point where it's getting harder and harder to find some of the fossils and stuff just because the surface is breaking up. Do you have any problem like that at or is the river overtopping it often enough that it doesn't, or?
Well,
is
the
that
main,
more-
the lower fossil beds and the upper fossil beds suffer from different ways of erosion. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, on the lower fossil beds, the primary erosional cause is sand silt in the river physically wearing the rock down. And I have determined by observation that it takes that this fossil bed right here, where I'm moving my cursor, is wearing down at about a 1 millimeter every 20 years. And the reason I can say that is because in let's say 1997, a kid found a trilobite tail out here, about where my cursor is, that had just chipped off. It was very fresh. I mean, and it was literally just the tail. That's all it was. And then about 20 years later, you couldn't see it. You couldn't, I mean, I knew exactly where it was because of relationship with fossils around it, which are still visible. But the trilobite is literally, and I mean, it didn't happen suddenly. It was slowly disappearing. And so, I said, all right, now, now is my end time. There's no sign of it. So it took about 20 years. And so it's about a millimeter of the limestone that wore out. So the lower fossil beds are wearing, I don't know, maybe some of that clay is actually helping protect it or slow it down. But let's say 5 centimeters per century is what the limestone is weathering down. On the upper fossil beds, however, because you have freezing and thawing, because it's exposed in most of the winter time, and it's, and the currents on when the river's up to where it's over the upper fossil beds, it's actually there's a big eddy that occurs right in this area here, and there's an eddy that actually comes right up along the shoreline, and it's fast, and all the rocks that weather out on the upper fossil beds get shifted to the left upriver basically, and then dropped over the edge of the little cliff there. And so if there's a fossil that used to be there and I can't find it, I'll go over and look. We actually had a stromatoporoid that disappeared a couple weeks ago, but I think someone walked off with it, to be honest with you, because it looked like a pillow. I've been using it for 29 years it's the only nice stromatoporoid in the upper fossil beds. It's gone now. And in fact, looking around, I found a gigantic water snake getting ready to shed its skin because its eyes were milky. First one of those I've seen in a long time. But I did not see the stromatoporoid. So freezing and thawing relatively fast. There's a lot of rock damage by freezing and thawing, but it's also exposing new fossils literally every year.
But you don't have plants that are trying to take over.
There is places like I'm going to use my cursor here. Here's the outer fossil, but there's a waterfall right here. There's actually willows over here, various and sundry water plants, okay, that like to have their feet wet. And so those places have, they've established a foothold, and I can't say that it's expanding because I just don't go over there that often, but visually from the river, from the shoreline, if it's expanding by inches, not very much. But around here and down here, there's very few plants, because this is the main Ohio River channel right here. This is the main channel here. This is called the Indian Chute. And then behind the dam now was the Middle Chute. And so this is the deepest and biggest part of the river. And as a result, the river actually does protect the fossil beds from freezing and thawing and plant formations and stuff. On top, we get willows and other types of flowering plants and other things, and vines and stuff like that. And so there, it's not so much that they get obscured like they do on your spillway. It's just that things grow over on top of them, grapevines and things like that. And so if we want to see them, we got to go in there with weed whackers and and loppers and stuff like that.
Okay.
But what you're talking about is because of the fact that it's a spillway and it's suffering from freezing and thawing,
Right.
and probably siltation from farming and dust and stuff like that landing on there. Literally, I mean, if you have access to a pressure washer as a demonstration area, and you can get a water tank in there and just, pressure washing area, you can keep it clean. And unless you put some sort of a window over it, like they do it in Badlands National Park, where, they have fossils that are preserved under these domes, it's a battle to, nature wants to take it over. I mean, there's no question about it. You gotta outsmart nature is what it amounts to.
Well, they did talk at one time about, in fact, I led a group of Boy Scouts in there to pull weeds for quite a few hours. And then they were gonna bring down a fire truck and try and wash it, but we found out that you can only do just a small percentage of what was being overtaken with weeds and stuff, so
Right.
kind of gave up on that idea.
Well, my suggestion would be pick one spot and clean that spot year after year, whatever's easiest for the fire truck to get to. Don't try to do the whole thing. Just do what you can, and then, to show some, to show people this is what the whole thing looks like, but we can't fight Mother Nature on this, but we can show this area over here. We did that with a water truck and a quarry one time at the Salem quarry, because some people found some crinoids with stalks and arms and stuff. And so we came back a couple weeks later and they had the quarry water truck, and we just blasted with a hose that whole area. I mean, just blasted it. And we found all these crinoid heads with stalks and stuff on them. I mean, a lot of them had been run over by bulldozers, so they didn't look very good. But, you can see the arms and the stalks and so forth. And so if you can pick one area, 25 by 25, for example, that's accessible, and just clean that area out. Maybe maybe use it as a scout project. Don't just pick one demonstration area and keep up with it. And then, you'll at least be able to have some show of what it normally looks like,
But there are areas that are clean and stuff, yeah, but but a lot of the small pockets are getting kind of filled in, but that's still, there's enough to see. There's plenty to see yet.
Okay.
One of the things that we did after the 93 and after the 2008 is we went in there with saws and cut out some of the nicer specimens, knowing that somebody was probably going to try and break them anyhow. So they put them up in a visitor center. So we did recover some nice fossils. And stuff.
Mhm. Yeah. Usually there's enough fishermen out there that if someone goes out there with a rock hammer, someone's going to tell them they can't do that.
Yeah.
So what is the most exciting fossil that you have uncovered?
Well, I mean, for me, it's just it's finding out, there's too many things. I mean, let me put it this way, like the trilobite, other people find the trilobites, I find stuff, but it's all transient material for the most part. I mean, I've collected a bunch of stuff over the years, personally, that's in our park collections. I found some good crinoid heads and some blastoids and, snails and just, the good corals, some really nice corals. In fact, we have a display called the Best of the Best in the exhibit gallery. And some of the specimens are actually from Cooper Lane or Atkins Quarry, but there's a number of them that are from the falls, and I collected all of them. So I can't say that there's one particular fossil that is, kid in the candy store. Which flavor do you want? I want them all, So no, I can't tell you there's one specific fossil that I'm more proud of that I found than anything else.
Good, fair enough.
At this point, I'm going to stop recording, but that doesn't mean you can't. You'll have to stop asking questions. As long as Alan's willing and able, we can go ahead and continue asking questions.
Well, I've got to go to work tomorrow.